Hey guys, Darren Kelly, coach of Wise Ocean Pods, and welcome back to the final episode of the 2024 AFL Fantasy season. So, on today's episode, it's going to be a bit of a longer one than usual. We will firstly be going through what my team scored and where I finished up with rankings and everything, which you can already see on the screen. But we'll also be doing a bit of a season recap. So, we'll go back to the round one team, really look at how everything went, and go through round by round what sort of went well, what sort of didn't go well, the good moves, the bad moves, and we'll also go through the wrapped and everything like that. And I'll also drop a few little things here and there in terms of next year. So please stick around. It's going to be a bit of a fun one to look back and reminisce about how the season's gone. So yeah, let's sort of get into it. Um, so how I went in round 24. Scored a 23-33 in the end, so pretty mediocre, which probably sums up my entire season. Um, Finished overall 8,769, so definitely not the season that we were hoping for when we first started, and yeah, a bit of a fall from grace from where we finished the last year. But that's okay. I still had a lot of fun and obviously made a lot of content for you guys, which hopefully I helped some of you guys get some hats and probably have personal best seasons. So hopefully you all enjoyed the content. I've definitely enjoyed my time making the content this year, and I do plan to stick around next year. So hopefully you all stick around for that. But let's go through just what everyone scored, I guess. So I won't go into too much detail because I think no one really cares at this point. The season's done. But yeah, Whitfield really strong finish, bounced back from having a one poor game a couple of weeks ago. So he had a really strong season. Definitely probably one of the highest averaging players in the second half for sure. And he's been an elite pick through the entire season pretty much. Back to his best after having a few downer seasons for sure. So he's been awesome. Tom Stewart unfortunately did get injured on 26. Probably a bit precautionary in the end because obviously Geelong are in finals. They are top four. So they played it pretty safe with him. I think he's fine at the end of the day. He probably could have actually played on, but it's just what happens sometimes in the final round where players are going to be put in cotton wool. So yeah, unfortunately there, but everyone pretty much had him, so I don't think that hurt too many people in their finals. Nick Martin found some really late form, back to back to back 120s in the last three games, where yeah, actually quite surprising because these are all the last two specifically are harder teams. Gold Coast are an easy team, so I did expect that one, but definitely didn't expect that against the Swans and the Lions. And probably a bit of a record break for him, specifically being this attacking defender, if not a wingman. He's played 100% game time in all three of those games, so be a bit interesting to see if more players start to do this throughout the season, next season particularly, because that definitely could increase some fantasy averages. So if this is just unlocks the potential for other players to do it, I don't think Nick Martin's the most athletic player. I think there are a lot of other athletic players like an El Goulden that could definitely do this, and that could just unlock some more potential for him specifically. So be interesting to see other players do this. But yeah, Nick Martin's been a great pick all year. I think he jumped up. I think he was. It's hard to. I think he was average 90 last year, so he put 17 points on his average throughout the entire season, which is ridiculous. And yeah, it was a great hold all season, realistically. There was obviously a small patch after the bye where he sort of didn't do very well. He was sort of like this 80 to 90 sort of player. Did have one big score in there, but you're looking at the average really throughout the period. But yeah, definitely found some form late on the season. Then we look at the bottom three in the defence, and this is probably where I just want to skip over. Jordan Clark, Hayden Young. I did end up keeping both of them, unfortunately. And Rivers, he has been shocking. He has been one of the worst trade-ins I can remember for a little while. I traded him after his two back-to-back 120s, thinking, okay, he's got this midfield role. Even though the run wasn't great, I thought he would at least increase his average, be quite, around that 100 mark. But that did not come through, and he probably averaged 70, if not a little bit less than that, with that 41 in there. So that was disappointing. Midfield, pretty up and down. A lot of, 80s, 90s, and then a couple bigger scores like the 120s and 150s. What you're going to get at this time of year when you have so many primos. Obviously, not all of them are going to hit all the time, and some do. So it was good to see Zach Merritt. I think it's just so consistent with his final games. I remember back last year where he just absolutely killed the final game, and he was starting to take kick-ins, and I think it's just the final game. I think it's something that we can just consider next year, that if you don't have Zach Merritt in the final round, he just gets the job done no matter what. He goes in the back line, he takes a lot of plus sixes. Sort of just, I don't know why the role changes in the final game specifically, but yeah, he just seems to get it done. I think he scored a 140 for me at the end of the last season as my captain on the Friday night. So big shout out to him. He's been awesome all season, and I have owned him all season as well. Did drop a few points in average. I think he started at 111 and dropped down 2 point averages. So at the end of the day, over 23 games, I'm not too mad about that. He provided some captain scores, and he's just one of the easiest picks to do at every start of the season, where you know he's going to keep his average around that sort of mark, because he's just that sort of fantasy player. So he's been awesome all year. I did trade in Errol Gordon in the end. I traded Bont to Errol Gordon, so that gained me a total of 2 points, which is pretty disappointing. Errol Gordon did get rested in that sort of final term. Obviously, 79% time on ground is pretty poor for him. Even the back half of the year, his time on ground average really dropped off. Like, he's hitting a lot of 80s here, where he early on he was this high 90 guy, averaged 97 there for a little while. So don't know what was going on there, whether it was sort of a bit of a management, maybe he was carrying a bit of an injury, but yeah, his last sort of, what's that, 8 games were probably pretty poor, besides that 150 that he threw in there randomly. Yeah, pretty disappointing in the end. I thought he would finish strong, but unfortunately was actually on track for a pretty big score, but he just was managed pretty heavily in that final term. So unfortunate that one. Did play a lot of full forward. Jack Steele pretty disappointing with a 90, but I guess it's probably not too much to be expected. It was Carlton. They are a bit pretty tougher, and they were playing for the finals, so tougher game there. The two Port boys were extremely disappointing, but again, Fremantle can be pretty tough again in Fremantle specifically, and Fremantle obviously playing for their final spot, so probably went in with the game plan to shut down Rosie and Butters, and maybe you have a chance, and unfortunately that didn't work out, and they both didn't score very well. Dunkley came through with a 111, nothing too special there. Walsh finished strong. Anderson did okay. I was pretty happy with trading him in 4 weeks ago, so he averaged that 110 sort of range through the final 4 games, which isn't too bad for what I paid for him. So happy with that. Cherry Marshall just did pretty mediocre things after what they've been doing in the past, 150s and 130s and 140s. So they finished pretty mediocre, but I think a lot of people had them captain anyway. The forward line did their thing. Zorko and Flanders, very, very good. Caldwell was a bit down. I think that was sort of just Merritt taking a lot of the points. So, yeah, it's pretty disappointing at the end of the day. But I guess that's sort of the what happens with Parrish back a little bit sort of throws in the mix with what happens. It was also a tougher game, right? Like, the Lions were one of the toughest matchup for midfielders, so not super unexpected there. The Heaney laid out was probably the biggest news of the round, honestly. Yeah, definitely did not expect that. And I think it was just soreness at the end of the day because he was named emergency. Luckily, though, I did have Mana on the bench, which was, I sort of got kissed a little bit because I had actually no way of looping Mana on field because Garcia and McRae both got named as a sub. So I had no red dot loop to actually provide in that forward line or midfield, so couldn't access that. So yeah, Heaney laid out sort of saved me a little bit, and it was good to be able to fall back on him. I also traded out Simpkin and traded him to Connor McDonald. Just thought that matchup was pretty nice, and Connor McDonald did score well, but unfortunately Simpkin did go pretty sicko mode, kicked 3 goals, and I think put up a 121, so I did end up losing points overall for my trade, which is never what you want, but sometimes you just got to take the punt on these things. I did put the VC on Cameron, even after all the shenanigans with the time change and all that sort. So yeah, happily took the 121. This could have been massive though. He was on 7 goals at halftime and only managed to kick 2 goals in the second half. So pretty disappointing with that. I thought he was on track for something record breaking. But yeah, definitely fell away a little bit in that second half where I think Geelong just went into sort of a bit of management mode. They didn't probably need the percentage that much. I thought they probably would have fought for a little bit more because they could have probably jumped one of the other top four teams. I think they could have finished second actually above Port if they got enough percentage, which they were on track to do. Yeah, just didn't quite finish high enough. But yeah, definitely took that. But yeah, that's the team. That's where we finished up. Overall, it's hasn't been the season that it was after, but it's been a lot of learnings and a lot of fun anyways with the whole content and been able to do some different moves that I probably wouldn't have done if I was in a different position where I was fighting for a car or a hat as such. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of risk, a lot of laughter, and a lot of pain at the same time. But yeah, that's just fantasy sometimes. But yeah, now what I want to do now that we've sort of recapped where my season sort of finished, I want to sort of go back and look at how it all started and see where it sort of all went wrong and what were some good moves, what were some bad moves. So let's go back to the starting team and let's have a quick look, right? So if I look through this entire team, I don't think it's the worst. I don't think it was a terrible starting team. I think it's probably a little bit of there wasn't any risk in here. Like it was a pretty vanilla team. Like all these guys were pretty um, highly owned. Maybe Newcomb was probably the only one. I think he was about 12% owned at the time. Um, and the one that obviously is a big hole in here where I probably didn't have as much faith in than what a lot of other people did and probably overthought it too much, where it was Cherry. He was by far the worst miss this season, and the amount of cash generation that he provided just killed my season. I didn't expect him to go that well, and to go with Grundy over him, that also was not great. Even though Grundy, again, was still a pretty decent pick in his own right. Like, I think if I can bring it up here real quick, he was priced at 677k, so what's that, an 80-ish average. He did put 17 points on that, but yeah, didn't quite. No, sorry, he was priced at 75 and he got up to a 97. He put up 22 points on his average, right? So that's a pretty good season overall in terms of points gained. But when you have a Cherry that was priced down at 66 and he's gone on to, I don't even know what he averaged in the end, like one. Why isn't it going to show me? It's probably because he's in my team. Anyways, he had a monster season. I think he probably put 50 points on that. So that's just a monster season and definitely one that we've got to consider next year. But if I go through this, Harry Sheezel, I think a lot of people had to start him. He started the season was unreal when he was playing that defensive line. Didn't drop below 120 until round 6. It didn't even drop below 100 until round 8. So he had a phenomenal start. So I think a lot of people had to start him. Same with Whitfield. His preseason game really showed that he was going to have a cracking year, and he did. He massively improved his average after the last couple of seasons. Even having that early buy, it still was worth just taking him on. He did really well. Wasn't the greatest in the start of the season. Like, yes, he was getting, low hundreds, but wasn't anything groundbreaking, but was doing pretty well. Did cop some attention throughout the season, but his second half of the year was unreal. And yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people did trade him out in round 12 when they sort of thought he's been dropping off. His last 6 games were pretty poor. Definitely averaging probably around the 80 mark. Yeah, pretty disappointing in the what went in just slapped it on your forehead with going probably averaged over 120, if not 130 in the final part of the year. Or what's that? 10 games or so. He was just unreal. So he was an amazing pick. Hayden Young is the interesting one. When I looked back at what he averaged, he started at, he was priced at 89, so he only put 3 points on his average overall through the entire season. But I thought his first half of the season was pretty decent. He was averaging in the hundreds, doing pretty well for first time player in the midfield. He was averaging pretty low time on ground, which is probably the most disappointing thing. If that he could upgrade that to the mid 80s, if not high 80s, he could definitely become a pretty elite scorer. But yeah, I don't know how much I'll be considering him next year. That's for sure. Um, Definitely some bridges burnt with his his position. I guess he played a lot more forward than what I sort of wanted, especially in the second half of the season. But I still classify him as a pretty good pick. At the end of the day, I think everyone had him, so um, I think you had to start him, especially with his potential. Yo, I tick off. I think it was a great pick. When you consider he was priced at just over 600k, he was an easy pick to start with. He got us through a big portion of the start of the year where he just made some cash and you could jump off of him pretty early on. I don't know exactly when I traded him out, but yeah, this first bit of the season where he was averaging, above 90 was elite and definitely provided plenty of cash generation, which is what we were looking for at the start of the season. Williams is very similar. I give him a pass considering he was priced at 442k. So, yeah, he definitely provided plenty of cash generation through that first sort of 5 rounds or so. I think we did get news that he was the sub in round 6, so a lot of us jumped off at that point. I know I remember I did. So, definitely provided some cash generation there for us. So, which is nice. Nick Coffield, I think that's pretty much just put him in the bin. He fell off pretty quickly. Scored the 44 in the first round, so nothing great, and then had the injury at 2 in the second game, which is pretty disappointing. Zach Reed, that was the only game he played for me and a lot of other sides. I know a lot of people actually held him through the entire season. Just no way of moving off of him because he was just so cheap. There was nothing you could really do. Luckily, I was able to jump off of him pretty early on, but it didn't really provide me too much at the end of the day. So that was a pretty unlucky pick there. Blake Howes was a pretty good rookie pick, I think, especially for that first part of the season. He was killing it. He was putting up 80s, he was actually a fieldable option for us. And maybe it's probably a bit of some learning that maybe don't take this risk with these injury-prone players. Yes, they're cheap, but a rookie can provide you as much score as them and have a lot less risk because they're basement price or they're just above basement price, right? So it's probably just the unknown of what you're going to get that sort of round one. Is it better off just taking the risk? Okay, this player could either drop a 10 or a 70 or something, rather than going with someone that you've seen something from before, but is very injury prone. Something that I'll definitely be considering next year. Looking into the midfield, I was pretty disappointed with Bont's first half of the season. Yes, he was just putting up mediocre sort of 90s and 100s and even dropped, very low 50s, but I just expected a lot more. He had a pretty good run to start the season, which is the main whole reason why I started him. And probably a new philosophy for me, which is probably what I'll recap in the end here, is that I don't think I'll be paying for someone that's over $1 million anymore, unless the whole price thing changes and maybe that rule will be over 110 average or something like that. I just don't think it's sustainable for someone to maintain that sort of average. You'd take a very, very particular player that can do that. And I think we've got a couple that are on the list that could potentially do that. Cherry probably being the one that I'm probably considering for next year. But yeah, most cases they're going to drop in price and you're going to be able to pick them up at a pretty cheap price at some stage. And it only takes 1 or 2 games for them to drop like a poorer score for their price to plummet. And that's exactly what happened with Bontempelli. He was nearly priced at 1.5 mil, sorry. No, 1.05 mil, and yeah, I think he got below 900k at some point, and a lot of people were just able to jump on him because of his poor form. So that's 150k. A lot of people were able to save. Same with the merit, like he dropped at some point. Like even the end of the day, he dropped. He was at 930k. I paid a little bit over $1 million for him, so it's probably a bit of a learning there. Even though he provided some captain options early, I still think there was some captain options elsewhere. A lot of in the defensive line, even the forward line as well. So not always having to look for these captain options in the midfield as such. Ruckman as well is another big one. I did give Merritt a pass. I think at the end of the day, I paid 111 for him and he dropped for 109. the end of the day, I was able to hold him. I never had to trade him. He provided captain options. I give him a pass. Um, yeah, he didn't cop too much attention here and there. Like, it was a couple games, but at the end of the day, what he dropped below 100? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times throughout the entire season, dropped below 100. And those are probably some tag games here and there. And a lot of them are 90s and a couple 80s there. So, at the end of the day, I give that a pass mark, and I think it was a pretty good move. Butters, it's a tough one to read because he was very up and down through the entire season. He either had like a big 110 game or he had like an 80 sort of game. So he was very up and down. He just gets it done sometimes. What do you average? 106 at the end of the day. What I pay for him? It's hard to sort of see. I don't really have the information in front of me. Where is Butters? Oh my god, I can't even find him. But he was priced below 900k at the start of the season, so he definitely put a lot of average on that. I think it would have been just below 100 if from memory. I should be able to get it up here, but I can't seem to find it. Anyways, we'll move on. Yeah, so I still think he was a pretty good pick considering he was valued at the start of the season. It just probably wasn't as consistent as I would have liked, that's for sure. Newcomb, clear fail. His start of the season was putrid, so I was glad I jumped off him first round. I think it was just a case of Hawthorn bias for me. I really heavily looked at that practice game and thought he's going to be that midfield link for a lot of us. At the end of the day, that wasn't the case, and their game style completely shifted pretty early on. So, what do you end up averaging? 85. It's not terrible, but definitely not that midfield premium that I was looking for when I paid about. I think he actually dropped an average throughout the season, so definitely not one that I'll do again. Nick Martin, clear tick. He obviously increased his average quite drastically. He was priced down at 770k. I've got to get the break evens up. I can't seem to find a lot of them at the moment, but I'll probably have a look a little bit later. But yeah, easy tick. He was a great one. McKercher, obviously the rookies were all great here and there. I think I nailed the rookies in McKercher, Sanders, Roberts, Sharp. Probably the other one I probably didn't have here was a Manor, but he was pretty late on. Gorn was a pretty good start pick at the end of the day. I think, he provided a lot of captain option early on. He was killing. He was highest averaging player for a majority of the season until his sort of injury came after the bye there. So he was a really good pick, and he was priced at 92, and he averaged 112. So what's that? 20 points above, easy, probably top 3 rucks there. So he was a great pick. Grundy, I won't give a pass. It's a tough one because when you compare it to Cherry, it's like it's a failed pick, right? But in the grand scheme of things, he increased his average by 20 points, 22 points. So that's again a good pick, but I probably just didn't get the most of it because I did trade him out after 5 rounds where he was only averaging, 95, if not just over 100 there. So, I'll give it a pass mark, I guess. Forward line, Heaney was a great pick. Probably should be winning a Brownlow, but unfortunately will not be. Fisher, if he would just held down his role throughout the entire season, he would have been one that I could have just held. But unfortunately, he was dropped and made sub and all these different things. And I think he's probably pretty much done for in terms of footy now. I don't see how he keeps his spot on the side with a few more rookies coming in that probably provide more potential. So yeah, he's been a very up and down pick. I know a lot of people traded him in, if not twice, 3 times because he became really good at the last bit of the season as well. So yeah, pretty good starting pick. No, 5. I'll give a fail. I'll give that a fail, even though he was priced down at nearly under 500k. He just was not the player I sort of expected, and I held him way too long as well. Like I held him through some of the subs he had. It really took it up into the bye. I think was when I traded him out. So he was a fail pick there. I'll take that on the chin. James Jordan, I will give a pass. He provided some cash generation through the first 5 games, which is always the plan for me. I traded him out at round 5 when he had that early season bye. He provided plenty of cash considering he was priced down at 454k. So yeah, give that a pass mark. Sexton, I'll give it a fail. His first couple games were pretty poor. So his second part of the season was pretty good. Like when he had this little 5 game patch where he was averaging over 100 when we did trade him in again, was pretty decent. But yeah, it didn't last very long. Probably a lesson learned there that these fringe players that are only holding a role for a particular reason, definitely ones to be wary of. And then Wilson, he was the rookie pretty much of the season, I think. He was, I don't know, he provided a lot of big scores for a lot of players, especially being in the forward line as well. Probably not as good in the second half of the season, but definitely for that first part of the season, I was just losing points on points not having him because I did trade him out so early. Besides that, Lazaro is probably a bit of a fail. At the end of the day, he probably increased his average a little bit, but wasn't a huge amount. Harley Reid was okay. In terms of impact, it was great, but probably fantasy wise, it wasn't much to be desired, which is always a flag that we always thought. And Seth Campbell was pretty good. I was pretty happy with starting him. Yeah, it was good to see we got a sort of a sido in round 0, so we knew that was going to be guaranteed sort of price rise there. So but yeah, overall, the starting team was pretty decent. I was pretty happy with it. It probably just lacked a lot of that risk factor that a lot of people had, where you had a Cherry, you had a Jordan Clark, which people were pretty hot on. So probably could have gone deeper in the defense line and not had that risky Nick Caulfield sort of player in there. Max Holmes probably could have slid in there. I was pretty hot on him all season, so probably just a bit of learning for myself was to back my gut. I thought he was going to go well, and he did. Um, Boner, I wasn't super keen on, but I did jump on him pretty early on. So that's one of those more risky players that I was probably happy to have a sighter in and trade him pretty early. And like I said, Cherry, I think those are sort of the main players that I really missed out on. I don't think there was too much to be desired in the forward line as in terms of risky picks. But yeah, let's just go through round by round and see sort of, I guess, some of the highlights, some of the good moves, some of the bad moves. So round 1 trade, I was pretty pleased with. I jumped off Newcomb and I jumped off Reed, obviously being injured, and traded in Bonner and Dan Rose there. Bonner obviously was a really good pick for a majority of the first part of the season where he was racking it up in the defense line. In the defense line for Saints, but being in a midfield was providing plenty of points. Massimo, Dan Rosie did okay. Like I jumped on him for his 90, but then he dropped off pretty quickly for that sort of that little patch. And overall, his season was pretty good. He averaged close to an 80. So if you held him throughout the entire season, it would have been okay, but definitely something you wouldn't have done because it would have been very up and down for you. And was at the end of the day was really realistically nowhere near the top sort of defenders anyway. So probably a good and a bad trade there. But early on in the season, you can make those trades. He did make a lot of cash generation. This is probably the other thing that you got to consider. The other thing that I wanted to mention here was that my captains, probably early on in the season, I was probably a little bit too conservative with my captains. I think I needed to just back in, okay, they didn't hit that 110 mark that I was really looking for. Knowing how that I'm pretty good at captains and backing in my research and my information, just sort of backing it in there, I took a lot of these lowest one sort of these medium 100 sort of scores early on, whereas I could have definitely searched for a ceiling score when you've already got a fair few primos that you want. So that was round 2. Round 3, probably made some pretty good trades here as well. Caulfield and Sexton out for Powell, who provided plenty of cash generation, put some really good scores in our forward line. Pink was probably a bit of a fail. He stuck around for my entire side. Probably just another key learning is don't trade in a key position player. It never works out for you realistically at the end of the day. I think it was just a case of I didn't really have anyone else to go to at that time, but probably should have taken a punt on someone that probably could have been named later on in the track of the season. But it's always a risky pick. Yep, captains were good again. Everything looks pretty okay for the early part of the season. The ranking was actually pretty good early on. You see here we do jump up quite early on, so I was in a pretty good position early on in the season. yeah, just a few things fell away. Again, took a 109 as an average as a captain options, when you got a few of your key players, the players that you paid for at the start of the season to be your captain, and I didn't sort of back them in as such. A little bit disappointing there. This is where it sort of fell off though. Darcy Wilson out after he went sort of 60s, 50s, and a 37. Really halted his cash generation, I think. But him after that was just killing it, and that was really, really hurting me. What he was probably averaging 80 through until the buys there, which was just unreal. He went up another probably 400k from when I traded him out. So that was a big miss, and probably um, one of the key bad moves I had throughout the season. Lazaro was a good trade out. He wasn't playing anymore, I don't think, at that point in time. Yeah, he got dropped for round 4, I believe. So he needed to go. Got in Dempsey, got in Harvey Thomas. So I was pretty good at trading in my cash generation rookies, but also did trade out one in the on the other side of things as well. So it's a tough one. In hindsight, maybe I could have traded out a Clark. Maybe I was too bullish on a Clark because he had that sort of nice midfield role, and he could have put up bigger scores, and we saw that in the preseason. So I guess it's probably that role over how they're scoring thought process. So definitely something that to be considered next year for us. Round 5 did jump up into the top 3k there. Obviously some big scores again. Did drop a McKercher 2. I can't remember exactly what happened in that game. I think he got subbed out very, very early on that too. Got Big Mac score 149. I think that was one of my highest for the season. Heaney. Sorry, this was the game where Sydney Swans had their buy, the early season buy. So I did trade up Grundy and Jordan and got in close here in Marshall, which in the end of the day, in hindsight, that was a really good trade, I think, and it was sort of my target. It's just unfortunate the way things sort of turned out quickly after that. So round 6, unfortunately, Royal Marshall had this sort of foot injury. He was really struggling, 62. Thought he'd go really well. So, yeah, captain didn't really go as well as planned, unfortunately, in this one. But that was okay. Still got a 103. So I was happy with that. When you're falling back onto someone, you're just happy to get 100 at the end of the day. You're just really searching for that ceiling. So that was a bit of an unfortunate one. Really happy with the trades here again. Massimo and Sanders, you're trading both of those out for Graham, cash rookie, and Flanders, who was by far probably the best forward, I would say, if not very close to it. So again, good trades there. Round 7, jumped up to 2.1k rankings, so really, really good position again early on. Captain went well. It was just Roma again, dropped another lower score, which was pretty disappointing. My trades were Fisher were out. I believe he was the sub in this game in round 7. Yep, he got a sub, so that's why I traded him out. And Williams, where was he at? So yeah, this is the game just before I think he was named sub or something like that. I don't know exactly why we knew he was not going to be playing. He only played the 41% time on ground, so I think his time was up. Maybe it was the fact that his cash generation was pretty close to being done, but he did score the 91 before that. I can't exactly remember, but trading them out, at the end of the day, both of those are pretty good trade outs. Hugh Garcia was an okay trade-in terms of a rookie, like a cash cow. McRae was not, unfortunately. I think that was sort of I could only get sort of halfway to a primo, and I thought I needed to fix up this mid forward spot, and I thought McRae would be okay there. He was okay for a decent period, but nothing amazing. Like, did drop a few 60s in there, so yeah, I'll give that a failed trade there. This is where things start to get really messy, and you see that massive drop in rankings from 2.1 to 7k. So drop 5k ranking in one round. And looking at the trades, it's Dempsey and Roma to Sweet and Green, which we know Roma went on to have a massive. I think he averaged the most of any player throughout the rest of the season. And I traded him to Sweet because he had Jack Hayes come in and sort of do that supporting role. So I was a bit concerned with that. At the end of the day, if I thought about it more and I wasn't sort of in that mindset, I would have known, okay, Jack Hayes isn't going to provide the most ruck support at the end of the day. It wasn't like a Tom Campbell coming in, which just quietly Tom Campbell has been delisted. So thankfully that's not going to be an issue anymore. But yeah, Romar, this point of the season was where I threw it away. Trading at Romar, and it's, again, probably a learning for me is that you don't want to just jump at these injury shadows. Like, yes, the club has stated that he's managing something, but if he's playing at the end of the day, you got to think that they wouldn't risk one of their elite players for further injury. They're just gonna get him through, and he'll get through at the end of the day. So when it comes to these elite players, you don't just jump off of them willy nilly like I sort of did. Even though Sweet was a pretty decent sort of cash cow option at the time. Um, it definitely wasn't worth trading a Romar to him. Probably should have played it safe and put Sweet on the bench as such and played it as an R3 instead. Dempsey, I think I was okay with him trading out. I think at the time he was pretty much maxed out in price for where he was at. He was putting up constant 50s. He had some decent scores as an F6. So yeah, didn't mind him there. Did pay a lot for him though. Is probably the other thing. I think I paid over 400k from him. He only went up like another 100k from there. So jumped on a bit late for that. So it wasn't like a massive good trade for me there to get him in. But Tom Green was a big fail trade. Traded him for his injured 7. And then he went on this massive slump of form where he didn't hit over 100 for 5 or 6 weeks there, and eventually turned it around when you sort of least expected it. And I think a lot of people were jumping off at this sort of stage in the buys and stuff. So I did hold him through a lot of this. So it was sort of like you give and take sort of here and there. So at the end of the day, it was sort of just pass mark in the end. And then I did trade him out for the final little bit there, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this is where I'd really dropped the low score on my captains. Went Sheasel, didn't provide the goods because he was playing a different role, and then Max Gorn didn't really get it done with a 92. So that was probably one of my worst captain scores for the year. Round 6, sort of tried to pull it back a little bit. Did I have to trade in English after Sweet was named ill. I think he had COVID at the time, so that was a bit of an unfortunate situation where I had to waste yet another trade on my ruckman. That was now 3 at this point, so I went Grundy to Marshall to Sweet, and then then I had to trade in English as well. So that's already 3 trades I wasted in the ruck line, while a lot of other people probably didn't even touch that ruck line at this point and probably were getting upgrades elsewhere. So again, probably another year learning is that don't waste your trades in the ruck line up too much. Like, you really want to try and keep it as simple as possible. Just keep it simple. Hold them as long as you can, because a lot of other people will be doing trade upgrades elsewhere on the field while you're messing around in such a critical area in your field there. So definitely a huge learning for me there. English was okay. I'll give him a pass. At the end of the day, I did trade him in when I didn't have much of an option. He did have a pretty good run, so I thought I'd do it. He probably averaged just over 100 for me in this period, so I'll give him a pass mark. But yeah, when you compare it to others like such as Rowan Marshall, Cherry, and stuff like that, he was by far lacking a lot of points. So yeah, it's hard to really give him a pass mark, but I'll give him that. Jake's Liga was a clear fail. I think I traded him in after he was having this sort of 90 to 100 period, and he just went to a shitter and barely dropped above an 80 until I traded him out in his buy. So that was a clear fail trade. More of an impact play, and I sort of knew that going into it. I just thought the run was really good. Maybe he can bump up his average to a 90 throughout the stage, but unfortunately didn't happen. Again, looking at the rookies, they all were going pretty well. Sharp was by far one of the best rookie picks of the year. McKerch was still hanging around, and Closey came in pretty clutch in there. Howes was still hanging around. Unfortunately, Graham got dropped for a period of time, and Seth Campbell was okay. He was there as well. But yeah, we'll keep moving along. Sorry, I'm trying to make this quicker because I don't want to spend all like 2 hours on this video, but This is when I traded in Luke Ryan for his patch of pretty good form, where I traded like Harry Sheezel with his poor form. He dropped back to back sort of low, a 71 and an 89, playing this more forward role. So I thought jump off him while I think he was priced at over $1 million at this point. And I thought just cash him out, get into another player that can provide me a ceiling score, which was Luke Ryan. I ended up getting these three big scores, 126, 144, and 143, which I thought was a masterstroke at the time. But then probably things changed very quickly, and I probably held on to him far too long, where he was putting up these 50s and his 70s and 60s and stuff. So give and take there again. What were my trades? McKercher out as well. I think he was being dropped, or he had a bit of an injury. I think it was a foot injury at this point in time. So was scoring really well, came out with a foot injury, and he was out. So I needed to trade him, unfortunately. So I got Ryan and I got Oliver in. So again, probably a bit of a wasted trade. If I ended up just holding Sheezel and making upgrades elsewhere, then I would have been much better off rather than sideways trading this. While it did provide me some ceiling scores throughout that period, it didn't last very long, whereas Sheezel definitely probably out-averaged Ryan for the remainder of the season. I think a lot of people would have just held Sheezel, so it's probably a bit of a wasted trade there, a bit of a learning again. And Oliver was a bit of a... Everyone's doing it. He's showing a bit of some scoring capacity. He's getting back in form, I think it was this sort of period he went sort of 100, 90, 94. And it was sort of like, okay, can we jump on him? If he's going to average this, I think it was priced at like 60 or 70 at that point. So he was very, very cheap. I think it was just one that we want to jump on there. Moving on. John Clark, Graham. So yeah, another probably a bit of a rookie downgrade here, jumping off two rookies and getting in another cash cow, and jumping back on Sexton for his second stint in my side when he went on this pretty big patch of decent form. So didn't mind him there much at all. Did provide some pretty good scores for that period, but yeah, bit of a nothing trade in the end. Probably just bank some cash, move on. But this is where the ranking was really, really sliding. I was really struggling with team value. I think value is king. I think we all know this, but something that I was really struggling in this time of the season, where I just have missed a lot of those key sort of players, like your Cherries, your Wilsons, that provided you well over $1 million in terms of cash generation. So that's where I really just missed those key players. Then we get into the buys, I think, where I did make some pretty good moves. I did jump up some pretty decent score ranking, so that was already 3K ranking just in 1 week, the first week of the buys. I'm pretty good at the buys, I think, if I don't say so myself. But just looking at some of these moves, Sweet out, Fife out, Howes out, got in the cash cow in McAuliffe, got in Dacos, and then got in McRae as well, which probably was a bit of a foul pick because he did stick around for the remainder of the season. So it was okay. At the end of the day, in the buys, you really want to jump off these sort of mid prices and get up to the prima that you're really looking for. So that was sort of my target throughout the buys. Captains were going pretty well again. Not much more to say about that. Round 13, again, jumping off these mid-priced rookies, so Bonner, Reed, and Sharp, getting on to a Fisher, a Zorko, and a Dowling. Obviously, this is when Fisher was just going sort of psycho with the new role without a Sheezel, so he was one that we really wanted to get onto. He had the Eagles coming up, so yeah, wanted to jump on there. Ended up probably being a bit of a wasted trade at the end of the day because he went pretty shocking after that. And Zorko by far was one of the best picks that you could have gotten to early. I still have a screenshot of when I was looking at him in round 3. But yeah, unfortunately didn't have the balls to just pull the trigger and do it. But nevertheless, I got him in eventually, and he stayed on my team for the rest of the season. So I definitely consider this to be a good trade in the end. Got Dowling, who was a good cash cow as well. Flanders, the VC, with a 163, was by far one of the best captain options I had throughout the season. Just looking at the midfield, though, like, look at how many points I'm missing. You had Bont going 90s, Merritt just scraping to 100, Tom Green at the time was going 70s, Oliver 60s, Saliga was dropping 30s and even a couple 70s there, and then yeah, just really missed a lot of points. Luckily, this was the buy, and a couple of these scores was dropping off, but yeah, just a lot of missed points in the midfield for sure, for sure. Move on to round 14. Probably a bit of a failed trade here for me. Like jumping off closely was good at the time. Sligo needed to go and Oliver as well. But I traded in Jordan Clark, who was coming off some serious form. Like look at that, 140, 128, and 150. But yeah, never really recaptured that form throughout the rest of the season. So that's a bit of a failed pick. Traded in Shawmakers. He was playing at the time and did provide some pretty decent scores through that period. Just unfortunately didn't hold his spot on the side long enough to really get into that maximum cash. And then Sarong was by far a failed pick. He was lighting it up through the first part of the season. I thought, okay, this guy's such an easy sort of. He would just provide me week on week 100 points no matter what. Only dropped below 100 twice in the first part of the season, but then his form right after that point was just so stinky. Only put up 300s after that. So it was a very backwards and forwards season for him, and unfortunately I got on the raw end of it. Yeah, so bit of a failed week in terms of trading here, but that's just fantasy. Sometimes you, and that's probably just a flag to jump. Sometimes you jump out when there's talks about a club changing their game style. Don't trade into those players. We heard that they were trying to change their game style because a lot of the players were searching for, touches and those stats sort of things. And they're really trying to push it that they want to play quicker, they want to do other things. So probably should have been a big enough flag that I shouldn't have jumped on these sort of two Freo players, and maybe should have just played it safe and only jumped on one of them, or just looked elsewhere completely. And the final buy round at the end of the day, I think I jumped up over 3,000 spots in the buys overall, which is I thought was pretty good, considering where my team was at this point of the season, where I was really struggling with team value. Like I said before, my team was in pretty much shambles at this point in time. So thought I did a pretty okay there, but what I do here this week, Jack McRae needed to go, Seth Campbell had maxed out price, and McAuliffe was being dropped and made sub, so jumped off him as well. Got in Sammy Walshaw, held throughout the rest of the season, and jumped on two pretty important cash cows there. So again, really good trades, I thought, and yeah, was able to get a pretty good captain option there. Back end of the season, round 16, I think this is when I started to hit my strides a little bit. I started to have a lot more of these good trades. So Tom Power was dropping stinky scores through this period, so jumped off him and cashed out Harvey Thomas. Got on a Caldwell, who was absolutely on fire, and got on a Humphreys, who was a pretty important cash cow again. Captains were going really well. Freya cashed him out, traded out Fisher again, got onto Rosie and a Simpkin, who I was pretty happy with. I paid pretty little for Simpkin, and he had some pretty important scores through this back half of this season. I think, yeah, we traded him in round 16, so it wasn't the greatest score to kick us off. So 106 was it? Yeah, I think, yeah, round 17. Sorry. I saw that he had a pretty good run for midfielders, so I just sort of jumped on him a little bit earlier than I'm sort of what I wanted. But yeah, definitely provided some pretty important scores from that F6 spot for a while. And Rosie was pretty important through this second part of the season as well. Round 17 I traded him in, instant reward there. And only dropped below 100 twice in that period. Unfortunately, they were both 70s, but I think he was well above what I paid for him for sure. So I'll count that as a pretty good trade. This was by far my lowest captain score for the year. A 71 from Max Gorn definitely hurt, and it's probably by far my lowest captain score I've had for a little while. It was a bit unfortunate with that one where he did get injured in the third quarter and didn't finish out the game. So you take that on the chin. I think a few other players had that. I know Mitch from Mitchmond on the Ball Boys, he copped that as well, but he still managed to finish top 20, so he killed it, had a good season. So it shows you that even if you have these poor captain scores, you can still have a really good season. Again, this is where Max Gorn had his injury and we had to trade him out, so everyone pretty much had him, so this is where it made the competition a little bit interesting, where a lot of people had to jump on different options. I think when I went back through my rankings, I did have Cherry number one as my the option to jump to if you didn't have him. So I probably should have listened to my own advice there, but I did end up jumping on Toby Nankervis because I liked to run. I wanted the uniqueness, and this is probably the trade I wouldn't have made if it was a regular season and if I was fighting for a hat or something like that. I would have played the straight bat, covered off Cherry because he was killing it and he was doing really well, and the competition pretty much had him. Whereas this year I was able to go on the Toby Nankervis, and unfortunately it didn't work out. He got injured pretty quickly on the game after, pretty much, which was pretty disappointing. But nevertheless, I jumped on Tom Stewart as well, which was a pretty good jump off from Sexton, who was losing that role that we all knew he had. Rank was slowly improving, jumped in the top 10k. Traded out Nick Dacos with all his tags coming up in round, what was that, round 19, I think it was? Yeah, round 19. At the end of the day, I don't regret that, I don't think. Like, looking at from round 19, he dropped 3 scores below 100, but then also put up some pretty big scores of 128, 116, and a big 157 at the end of the final round of the season. So, without that 157, I was pretty happy, but yeah, definitely that last one probably kicked it over the edge for me, where it probably became a bit of a failed pick, like a failed trade out in the end of the day. Again, is it worth trading out these players when they have potential tags, or they have a poor run of form when they're elite players of the competition? They're elite players in fantasy. We know that they get the job done day in, day out. So again, probably something I'll take into consideration next year. And I traded in Trent Rivers, who was shocking. I don't ever want to see Rivers again, even though he may be a decent option next year for us if he continues to get midfield time. And then I traded in Jack Steele, who I was pretty happy with trading him in from round 19. He averaged pretty decently, only dropping below 100 twice there, and they're both 90. So I thought that was pretty decent move there for me, and I jumped off Ryan as well, so nothing too bad there. Quickly get through the last couple games. So this is where I had some fun, and I got in Cherry from Nankervis with his injury, and by far had the most fun that I've had all year, pretty much, where he was just absolutely killing it. Like, what was it, 150, 156 he scored straight off the bat for me. VC on him. A lot of people did that, but yeah, was really pleased to do that in trading manner. So really good trading as well. Again, Cherry, another C on him, 150, take that as well. This is probably where, I guess it's a good and bad trade. I traded in Noah Anderson, which I was happy with, but Charlie Kerner did let me down with a bit of an injury concern he had. So that didn't really work out for me, but jumped off an Evans, who was cashed out, and a Tom Green, who had, again, a tough run of form in the final 4 games. So I think I'll give this a pass mark in the end of the day in terms of trading him out. He put up an 84, a 98, a 122, and a 94 in his last 4 games, where I knew he was going to have a bit of attention, if not have tougher matchups. So he probably just averaged over 100 in his last 4 games, so it's probably not the greatest tick, but I'll give it. He didn't really hurt me at the end of the day, so I was able to get Noah Anderson that did average more than him. So I guess it's points gained, right? Round 22, this is by far my best score, my captain score, where I did get that 168 from Cherry with the VC. So back-to-back Cherry scores, and I did get Enron Marshall as well this week for Team English. Just with how well he was going, I needed to get him in. So at the end of the day, this is how I finished with my ruckman. I ended up wasting 6 trades with my ruckman. So big learning there for me, that I do not want to waste that many trades next season for sure. Just to recap, I went from Grundy to Marshall, then I went Marshall to Sweet, then went to English with his sickness. Then I sort of held Gawn and English for a fair bit of the season. Max got injured, so I had to trade him to Nankervis. Well, I didn't have to, but I traded him to Nankervis. Nankervis then got injured, so then I traded him to Cherry, and then I traded English to Merrill Marshall at the end of the day. So that's six trades I wasted in my ruck lineup, where in the years previous I didn't touch it. Like all in my fantasy winning season, I did not touch it. I just ran with Marshall in English through the entire season, and that's something that I definitely want to get back to next season and just really focus. Okay, whatever I got, sort of just stick with it, or really just be smart with it and not try and take these risky picks, risky moves in that line as such, because it is such a critical zone for us, only having two players on field and only having the one emergency, and most of the time that emergency is a red dot loop, so you're really restricted with what you can do. So definitely a huge learning there for me. But yeah, I guess to finish off, we've got a couple more trades here. So probably decent trades, I think. Traded out Dowling, who was cashed out and was dropped. English needed to go, and I got Romar in, and just traded it to Angus here, who was providing some pretty good cash gen, but he did get dropped, unfortunately, quickly after that. Again, captain was pretty decent there. Final two rounds of the season, or this will be the final one. I don't really need to go over the round 24 again. Captain again was good. Got Marshall's 131. Trades were Sarong to Dunkley and Kerno to Cameron, who Cameron had a pretty good end of the season. I think he went 80 and a 121, so I'll take that every day of the week for paying that much for him. Dunkley had a poorer game in the first one, but then finished off strong in the final game, so I'll take that, where Sarong just put up 90, so I'll take that for sure. But yeah, that's the recap of how my season went. It was very up and down. There was a lot of different learnings here and there. There's a lot of good moves, a lot more bad moves than good moves in my humble opinion. I guess I'll go through quickly some of my learnings that I've said throughout, but just to recap a little bit here. So one being be bolder with my captain choices. So early on in the season, I was being very cautious and I was taking these sort of 103s, 107 sort of zones, back in my research, back in the information that I'm aware of, and back those guys that I've actually paid for to be my captain, and just try and search for that ceiling. So that's one takeaway I'll take into next year. With my starting team, I want to take a bit more risk on next year. I think I went too vanilla and didn't really take any of those risky picks, like I said, Jordan Clark, a Holmes, a Bonner, a Cherry as such. Those sort of guys that we were all sort of pretty keen on, but I just wasn't super confident with that. I was willing to put them in my starting squad, thinking that would hurt my season. I think I just got to take a bit more risk next year and sort of back my gut a bit more. Another one was don't jump at the injury shadows. So these guys are elite athletes. They're in the side for a reason. The clubs aren't going to risk them for permanent damage if they can prevent it. So if they're in the playing, then I think you just back that in. That's specifically looking at Roll Marshall, where he had that foot injury. I shouldn't have probably just jumped off at that, thinking that he's going to continue those poor scores. Eventually, he was going to turn the tide. It was only a matter of time. So definitely something I'll definitely consider next year. Value as king is obviously one that I just keep reiterating to myself, that early on it's so important to get on these cash generation and increase your value as quick as possible, because you can very quickly fall one primo behind, two primos behind, and at the end of the day, I didn't complete my side until I think round 20 or something like that. So whereas a lot of teams were complete before the buys or very close to the buys, so I was very far behind because I wasted so many trades. Really just trying to get those upgrades as quick as possible and get that cash generation moving. So probably not a whole lot you can help with that, but just something that you really want to consider when you're starting a new side next year. This one's probably just one that I put in there because it's don't be different just because you want to be different, right? When it comes to these elite premiums, like your Goldens, your Dunkleys, your Trelaws, those main guys that have shown a massive ceiling and are really fantasy friendly and were having elite years. Don't try and be different just because everyone else has them and you're trying to make up those points. Just jump on them, cover the gap, because they can really hurt you, and they got away from me. I couldn't get on them because they were well over $1 million and I just didn't have the cash generation to be able to buy them. Just buy them while they were cheap. Don't be overthink it and just get on like everyone else did. I had the opportunity to get golden at the same time everyone else did, but I didn't because I wanted to be a bit different and tried something different and it didn't work out for me. So definitely something I'll have to think about, and probably just my new philosophy that I've sort of brought into my game this year is that I will not be playing over $1 million for a player next year, whether that's a starting pick or throughout the season. I just think that it only takes one bad score for them to really drop their price, and then you can buy them later on at a cheaper price and get on them at that stage. So whether that's a 1 million price tag or that's going to be a 110 average, it's going to be about that mark. So definitely a new philosophy for me there. But yeah, that sort of does it for my team review, I guess. That's the last thing I wanted to do is go through the AFL Fantasy Wrapped. Really look at my season, so we'll go through it here. Was top, nearly top 5% in rankings. Not great, but we'll take it. I peaked at 2.1, so that was my highest season, so ranking all season. So I was in a pretty good position pretty early on, but as we all know, it did fall away very, very quickly after that. It doesn't take many moves to throw it away. My best round was in round 21. That was when I had Cherry, had the captain, so that was good to see. By far, I didn't have the double digits or single digit rounds that I was accustomed to the year prior. That's alright. In hindsight, I scored 98% of my team's possible points. So I think this is probably an area I excelled in. I saw a lot of other teams that were, much higher ranked than I was, and there were, 1,500 points that they missed out on. So I think that really shows that my looping game and my captain's game was probably stronger than what most people's are. So really maximized the amount of points that I could, but just showed that my team was pretty rubbish throughout the entire season. I couldn't really make much more of a difference. 77 different players in my team, so definitely had a fair few that rolled through there. A few repeaters there. North were by far one of the highest teams that I had. St Kilda was second. That's pretty. I think the back to back. Last year I had most St Kilda players, and didn't have many of these Brisbanes or Carltons or Collingwood, stuff like that. So a little bit interesting there. Overall, most scored was by Essendon, so that's mainly probably by Merritt, Nick Martin, Caldwell. I'm struggling to think who else might have been there. I think it's probably the main three, honestly. Freo was also up there. Did have a lot of Freo players throughout the middle part of the season. So yeah. Here's my survivors. So Bontempelli probably could have been in here as well, but did trade him out in the final round. So really good. Whitfield was obviously a great pick. Hayden Young was okay first part of the season. Merritt, I think, is a pass. Butters was a good pick. Martin was a great pick, and Heaney. And Barnett is goated no matter what. He's also part of the bench warmers, but he was by far not a bench warmer. He was my captain a lot of the time this season, so big shout out to him. But yeah, all these other guys can get in the bin a little bit. Here is my mid-buy report card. So ended up jumping up 2,000 spots throughout the entire buy, so pretty decent, I thought. I don't know how actual this grading system is, whether it's just you get an A plus or you get an F, depending if you fail or not. So I'll definitely take it. Where my team was at, I'll take getting that 2,000 rank increase. Captains, vice captains, so distinct captains. I only did distinct captains 13 times. Scores over 100 were 22 of the 24, so I did drop below 100 twice, which I know exactly who they were. It was max score on both times. Vice captain average 128.8, pretty decent. I've seen a lot of other people's 130 plus, so really big year for captains, I thought. Captain average 112, sorry, there. Not too bad. Oh, sorry. Overall average 123.9. I think that's a little bit down. I think I had a 125 last year, so a little bit down, but where my team at is not a big surprise there. Did take my VCs a lot of times, 17 of the 24 times, so definitely was pretty cautious in that stage. But when I didn't take my VCs, it was I only failed once where my C went worse than what my VC was. So that shows you that I did maximize a lot of my points with my captains. Only missed out on 30 points there, which if we look here, some pretty big captains. So 168 from Cherry, 163 from Flanders. Would have been nice to have a 150s, but yeah, couldn't quite get there. Didn't have the likes of Errol Gordon to put those 150s in there as well. That's all right. Lowest scores, both Max Gorn being my lowest ones, and this is what I was sort of saying early on in the season. I was just taking these 107s, 103s. I think I want to be a bit bolder, especially at this time of the year where by round 11 you have probably a dozen captain options that you're confident in. So why am I taking 109s at that stage? Probably want to be a bit bolder in that stage. But yeah, unfortunately, 71 for Max Gorn was pretty disappointing with his injury there. Can't help it though, unfortunately. Some pretty big on-field scores. Nearly all 160s pretty much from all goated players. Lowest scores, so Tom Green by far the lowest score there. Charlie Kerner with his 13 injured as well, and then obviously Tom Stewart's recent 124 in round 24 was pretty bad. Nat Fife's, I think he was subbing that game, so copped that, and then Tom Powers as well when he dropped off in form. So I'm pretty low scores in there. Instant reward trade, so Cherry was by far the easiest one. Then Rosie, you see a lot of these are late season, so round 20, round 17, probably luxury season pretty much is where we're looking at. Should be these instant reward trades. So I probably put my hat on saying that I'm pretty decent at getting those instant reward trades, just looking at fixtures and form and sort of things. Marshall's in here twice with his 138 and 140, so definitely loves coming into my side. Just unfortunately didn't stay there very long. Regretful trades. Obviously, Simkin makes the top of the list in the final round with his 121 in a big final game for him. Sheasel was also there, and a Marshall, as we've spoken about. So these two particularly probably very much hurt my season. Top cash cow, shout out to Sharp. He was by far the best cash cow for the season. And then you had Roberts, who was also very, very decent through the first part of the season. Then Evans and Dowling came pretty late, and then Closey was also in the middle there as well. So all very, very good players, got very bright futures, and potentially some of them even come back into our sides in future years. Particularly looking at Roberts, I think he's definitely going to be an option for us next year. Particularly, we'll see how things eventuate with Evans. What happens with Houston if he gets traded? Does Evans get more points in that side? Definitely one we could think of. Probably won't look at Sharp again just because he's already very highly averaged for a wingman. I don't think I'm looking there again. Dowling, if he ever gets a midfield role, definitely could provide plenty of value. And again, Close is probably a bit too pricey as a wingman option. So all good picks. Biggest cash hogs. So Bontempelli, yeah, I did hold him all season, but he only dropped me 100k. So doesn't look like it's the worst biggest cash drop in the end, but yeah, I'll definitely take it. Caleb Strong definitely was one of the worst ones. Dacos, 88k, who cares? And then the final two pretty failed picks there, so bit interesting there. Overachievers, Cherry by far averaged 141 in his 5 games for me, where he was only averaging 107 for the rest of the comp. Bonner, yeah, he was very poor outside of when the time that most of us owned him. I only owned Conor McDonald for 1 game, so that doesn't really count. Jeremy Cameron for 2 games, and Sharp was really good in the first part of the season as well. So underachievers, Kerno has to slide in there with his 11 and 51 in the 2 games that I owned him. Very disappointing there. Caulfield only played 2 games, so can't really consider that too much. Newcomb as well, 1 game. Hugo Garcia, he only played 2 games and scored 62. In a lot of the games that I had him, he was sub, so his average dropped off quite dramatically. And McKercher, I didn't own him through a lot of that period where he was dominating in the back line. So here's another interesting one that I'll be heavily looking at next year for sure. But here's the overall thing for my report card, I guess, for my Wrapped. Yeah, not much more to really say. I think now To finish off the video, what have we been going for? We've been going for just over an hour. So to think of finish off real quick, I just wanted to throw out a few players that I think I'll be considering for next season. Just around obviously 2025 for fantasy men's. Some players that I've already got on my blacklist that I'm heavily considering, or seeing how things play out in the off season. Obviously, a lot of things change, but some players that I'm considering is not Hayden Young, obviously. Tom Stewart is my number one. I've thrown him in there. I don't. These aren't actually in order. It's just, how do I spell Stewart? It's just, this is what happens when throughout the year I've just sort of jotted them down. So he came on the scene as a bit of a cheaper option when he was really struggling in the first part of the season. He averaged overall 68.7, but while he was in the midfield and playing quite heavily midfield, if that continues, he was averaging 105, 110 sort of areas. So he is definitely one that, if I just look here, this period of time, did not drop below 100. He was probably more of a 110 guy, if not even a 115 sort of player. So he's one I'll hopefully be looking at if that midfield role continues. So he is up there. He's going to be a defender will be a defender, 100%. So he'll be one to look at. Taranto is also another one that I will be heavily considering next year. His average clearly dropped quite significantly if this wants to load. Where he was averaging 112 last year, but only dropped to 95 this year with a lot of injuries, only played the 15 games. A lot of different factors here and there, just battling injury. So fingers crossed he has a good preseason and can provide us a pretty good cheap option as a midfield option. There's a lot to go under the bridge here with what Richmond are doing, because they've had a lot of they're going to have a lot of changeovers with a lot of players leaving the club. So where does that leave Taranto? Does that mean they're going to rely on him for more points, or does that mean they're going to be less points available because they can't get their hands on the ball as such, because they're going to be a bit of a worse sort of fantasy side? So tough one to really say, but fingers crossed he can get his game together. There was a few games here where he got subbed out early. His time on ground overall was pretty low, so if he can get back to this sort of 90s area where he started the season, he's going to be a smash pick next year for sure. So someone to consider. Filippo has to be in there. I think he's a lock for everyone's side next year, particularly if he has forward status. I think he should have forward status next year. I can't imagine that would have changed too quickly. He only pretty much played the 4 games in the midfield, so he should be a forward. And yeah, look at his average in the 4 games that he played in the midfield. Is over 100 there, so he is definitely going to be a lock in most people's sides as a forward. So lock him in, put him down, and do not move him unless things change. Bailey Smith obviously is another one. He's obviously had that ACL injury all season, so he will get the full discount of 30% next year. So he's also going to be a forward, so he's probably going to be a lock for most people. At this point of time of recording, I think he's going to go to Geelong, so he will probably be a Geelong Cat player, and potentially, and should have a lot of midfield time there, right? They're pretty much crying out to have more midfielders in there, so he will slot in there pretty nicely and be an easy pick for us. So I think we'll have a couple of guaranteed forward options for us to consider. Another one is Doherty. He's obviously gone out with a ACL injury in round 0, so he did not have an average. He had an average of 48, so he'll go based off his last year's average, and that will drop him down. I don't know what his average actually was. I know he was by far one of the top defenders last year, but he's going to be a nice defender option as long as he can continue on his way. What he averaged 102 last year, so 30% off that, or 9 games percent off that. So he'll be priced in the mid 90s or low 90s. So that will be, if not even in the 80s actually. So he'll be an easy pick for us. He is getting older though, so something to consider. Definitely something we want to monitor in the new season. Brad Crouch. What's happening with Brad Crouch? Who the hell knows? Did he actually even play that many games this season? Played 1 game this entire season. So again, he's going to get a massive discount. Does he go to a new club? Does he retire? There's been no confirmation. They've played the last game, so Does he just stick with the Saints and then he gets some more midfield time next year? I don't actually know what's really going on with him. I don't think he actually had an injury. I thought he was just sort of just wasn't being played. So big watch on what he will do. He'll be very cheap for what he's able to produce. We know he's an accumulator like his brother. Tom Duday is another one that's probably thrown on here just because of the injury sake, and we haven't really seen much from him this season. With obviously he's been injured the entire season. Came over from Adelaide to Brisbane and copped an ACL injury very, very quickly. So he'll be very cheap. He'll probably be in the 300Ks next year. If we go to his averages, I think he's been a pretty decent fantasy option for us in the past, where he has averaged 60s and stuff like that. So he'll be well below that. He'll probably be priced in the mid 30s. So he potentially provides 30 points of upside. So definitely something that we'll have to consider. If he even makes the squad, who knows, is another thing. He is a pretty decent player when he wants to be. So something to keep an eye on. Kitty Coleman, his partner in crime. What that defender mix-up is going to be next year with, what's his name? Zorko, Duday, and Coleman in the side. And then you've also got Harris Andrews and a few others that are elite backmen. So it's going to be a very weird mix-up. Does that mean they have to share points? Kitty obviously went out with the ACL injury in the first round. So he is done, and he's going to be very cheap for what he's been able to produce. So again, one we'll have to look at. He is named as a defender, I believe. I don't think he was a forward. Coleman. Yeah, he was just a straight defender. So there's going to be a lot of cheaper defender options and forward options for us. Guthrie is the next one I had on my list. Missed pretty much the entire season. Only played 4 games. So he'll get a pretty heavy discount on what he is. But he is 32. Will probably be 33 next year. Hasn't confirmed he's retiring. But obviously Cats are into the final. So we won't really know exactly just yet if this is going to be his final season or not. I think he probably sticks around for another year or so. But probably one I'll stay away with, just with how injury prone he has been. But definitely someone, if he is, flying in the mid preseason and he looks fit and he looks healthy and has a good preseason, then I think he might force our hand with how cheap he is. Hewitt is the next one that I think is going to be another awesome forward pick for us. Didn't play a single game this season, was already well down on his previous season price. So Hewitt, come on, load up. Only played the 14 games in 2023, which was his first season in his career. Averaged the 46, so he is going to get a huge discount off that and probably be priced in the mid 30s, if not close to low 30s. So he's going to be pretty close to basement price. He's got a forward status, and he's most likely going to play in the midfield line. They're pretty much crying out for that third midfielder where, you got Tim Kelly, you got Yo, and then they've got that sort of mix of who is that next person. So I know Harley Reid's also there as well, but I think he'll play a lot more half forward next year. So I think Hewitt will come into that side pretty quickly when he's fit and firing. So he's another cheap option that we can just slam into our side. I'm nearly halfway done with the list. McKercher, I'll make it quick. Obviously, with what he's been able to do in this second half of the season, where he was pretty much averaging 100 when he got that right role, he will be very, very cheap. He ended up averaging 82. So if he can bump up his average to be this sort of 100 guy that we have seen throughout the season, then he definitely provides some value. So I like him there. Cherry, even though he averaged 114 in the end of the day in the season, he just looks like he's going to be the next ruck pig. With what he was able to produce in the final half of the season was unreal. Only dropped below 100 twice in the second half, whereas in the first half he dropped below 4 times and had that stinky 50. So definitely some probably value there. That's still there, which is ridiculous to say when he is by far the most expensive player. So it will definitely come down to if you think he's going to back it up. Probably a bit early to say how much he's going to be priced at, what teams are going to look at. But I think with the value we have around the defense and the forward line, I think we can possibly look at him for sure. Curtin is probably the next one. How do you spell Curtin? Did I have it? There it is. Daniel Curtin. What he ended up averaging 32. Played a bit of midfield time as well, so he'll get a bit of a discount with his only 7 games played. So he'll get a little bit of discount on that. So he'll be pretty close to sort of that 30 points, I reckon. Only 9% discount. I don't know if he's going to be the most fantasy friendly player just yet, but with his game and times on ground in the final 3 games, if he can at least put up, 60s, if not bump that up a little bit with more time on ground next year and stuff like that, he's definitely going to be underpriced. So he's one that we can bank on. He's the future of the Crows club. So definitely one we want to monitor there. I think he'll be a defender option next year because he played a couple games in the defense, but definitely one we got to monitor. I'll be very surprised if it changes. I put Hall here, but I don't know how he actually finished the season. Averaging 33, so he will get a big discount with only playing 3 games, but didn't show a huge amount so far. So again, probably just more of a bench option for us, just putting a couple of rookies in there. I've put Sicily in here as another option as a defender. Obviously dropped quite heavily from his 2023 average. I think he averaged over 100, and now he's averaging 85 or something like that. Wants to load. 104.5 down to 87, so nearly a 20-point drop there. If the Hawks bring in a second tall defender, which it looks like they will, that Brass has requested a trade to Hawthorn, so if they get that job done, then that frees Sicily up a bit more to be that intercepting defender. So again, does he bump up his average, or is the game style too quick for the defenders now for this team? So it'd be interesting to see, but definitely something we can ponder early on. But I like what I'm seeing from him if things change there. To rattle off a few more here that probably don't need too much explanation is Caleb Daniel. If he finds a new club or if he cements his side back in the Western Bulldogs, he is extremely cheap. Show me there. He's averaged 50 this season, and that's what he's going to be average next season because he played 15 games. So if he can cement a best 22 spot, whether that's in his side or whether it's in another team, then he could definitely bump up his average to where he was previously. Caleb, what is he doing? Come on, not Jeremy Howard. Does he even play anymore? Caleb Daniel. I think he averaged 90s. Yeah, 89 last season, and yeah, so that prevents plenty of value. The next one was Jack McRae. Again, if he cements his side elsewhere, whether he gets traded or not will be yet to be seen. I think he should request a trade because he is not being utilised at the Bulldogs. So he obviously has been a fantasy-friendly player for a long time. So if he goes elsewhere, he will be a guaranteed pick, and he is a forward. Same with Caleb Daniel. Sardis is probably another one I've thrown in here as a forward. He didn't play many games at all this season. Essendon have not really used him at all. So did play the 7 games. Low time on ground, 49% time on ground through the entire season. So very, very poor by them. He will go based on his other average. I think next. It's tough to say because they both were under 10%, 10 games, so I don't really know how that really works. But he'll be cheap either way. Forward option if he can cement his best in the best 22, whether that's a midfield spot or that's a wing role. I think he'll be definitely one we want to look at. And finally, I've got 2 more options, which is Oliver and why isn't it going to show me? Leighton Oliver. So Oliver being the first one, obviously we know what's happened with him. He has by far dropped nearly 40 points in average. So whether he gets back in form next year, who knows? It's really tough to say. A lot of things going on at Melbourne at the moment. So fingers crossed he can provide a cheap option for us. Whether he gets traded or not is another thing. I don't think he's being traded at this point in time. Same with Petrarca. I know there's a lot of talk with Petrarca going on. But to finish off, I've got Matt Roberts as another option that you definitely want to consider for next year. Had his season breakout, really, really good. His back half of the season was unreal, and looks like he's going to be the Lloyd of, you know, the last couple of years, where his last, 6 games, 8 games, 7 games, something like that, he was averaging really, really well, probably in the hundreds. So when that role sort of changed, he definitely looks like he's going to be cemented there for the next sort of decade. So he's going to provide plenty of value there, probably 25%, 25 points of value potentially. So again, we'll have defender status, another cheap option. So definitely something to watch. But there's still a lot to go under the bridge. Obviously, there's a lot of off-season trades, rookies that come in. So a lot of different players are going to fill in spots. So whether things are going to change or not, who will not, we'll find out throughout the season. So. But yeah, it's been a long episode. It's been a long season. I am glad it's done. Big shout out to Christopher for taking it out. Congrats on winning the Hilux, mate. I couldn't message you privately because I couldn't really find you. I did see you on Twitter, but I couldn't message you. But yeah, big shout out to you. You did come in clutch there in the final round. Unfortunately, Tom from Pom United unfortunately fell flat in the end there, falling second. So I'm sure you'll be happy with 10 grand either way, mate. But yeah, I can understand you from that point of view where you've got all the pressure on you coming into the last round. It's very easy to let the pressure crack, and yeah, you can fall short, unfortunately. So yeah, good seasons. Hopefully everyone had personal best seasons. It was a very tricky season with a lot of different things going on, with the early buys to longer buy rounds and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, very, very tricky this season, and I don't think it's going to change. So hopefully you can learn a lot of things from this season and attack next season with a lot of passion, and hopefully come out on top next year. But that's been me. Thank you everyone for all the love and support that you've given me this year with the whole content creation thing. Obviously, it was something I've never done before, and I've definitely enjoyed my time doing it this year. Was glad to be able to give back to the community after winning at the year prize. So was very, very thankful for all the love and support that you guys gave me. Definitely a lot of learnings from this, and I do plan to continue going around again next year. So hopefully you guys stick around for that. Next year for sure, but I will also be doing some AFL Fantasy W content. It's not going to be nearly as intensive as what the men's has been. I don't claim to know as much about the women's as I do the men's. I've barely watched any games, to be honest, but I did finish 300th last year in the women's, so hopefully can go well again there with a bit more information out there and a bit more circulating community information. So yeah, stick around for that if you want to look at that. I will be dropping a team reveal pretty shortly before the season starts, which is on Friday. So yeah, stick around for that. But yeah, besides that, that's been me. Hopefully you've enjoyed the season, and I'll catch you guys next year. Enjoy, guys. Enjoy the break. Bye.